next up on our schedule, we have our Scientific Research and Innovation Tackling the Climate Crisis panel. I will be chairing that, and I am super excited to be a part of this incredible panel. We've had some incredible talks so far, and with a combination of perspectives that we have today in this panel, can only enforce some excellent discussions. And so, without further ado, let's begin. As the United Nations states, the climate crisis is a major threat to international peace and security. From its direct impacts in climate to the links climate change has with sea level rising, agriculture, and food security, it is one of the foremost problems our society faces. And one of the most distressing factors is its disproportionate impact around the world. Of course, just like how complex the threat itself is, it seeps into numerous disciplines, including science, technology, innovation, and public policy. So the question remains, can all these disciplines work together to tackle climate change? And what can be done to ensure equity at the intersection between research, innovation, and policy? And how can youth get involved? As a young person myself, answering these questions is critical, but unfortunately, I don't have all the answers. And that's why I'm so excited to be joined by our fantastic panel speakers who just might be able to get us a few steps closer to the answers. They've each got different experiences to share, both from their personal journeys and in their work to promote a more sustainable future. And over the next half hour or so, we'll be hearing more about what each of them have done, why innovating for the climate is key to creating a more sustainable future, and how each of us can be part of the solution. Let's start off with some introductions. Our first panelist is Dr. Maina Muniafu, a researcher in sustainable research utilization and conservation. Dr. Maina holds a PhD in botany and has been actively teaching and researching in the area of environmental sustainability, in particular the energy water food nexus, for the past 30 years. He is currently developing a natural product center and medicinal plant database to support the health sciences program of U.S. International University Africa, situated in Kenya. He has carried out a variety of consultancies towards food security, climate change adaptations, and water quality assessments. Our second panelist today is Meigan Diaz, a sustainable development advocate. Meigan graduated with honors from the bachelor's degree in international relations at Tecnológico de Monterrey in Mexico and is currently a master's in public policy candidate at the National University of Singapore. She has served as Mexico's youth delegate to the United Nations in New York for sustainable development issues and is also the founder of the youth-led initiative in Walucratec that empowers young people to develop sustainable development projects. Additionally, Meigan was a recipient of MTV's Generation Change in 2019 award. I think I can safely say that our panelists today are pretty impressive. And as we continue, don't forget to add any questions you may have in the chat. Dr. Maina, Meigan, it's great to have you a part of this panel today. Let's start off with something a tad bit casual. What has led you to focus your interest in sustainability and the environment? This can be anything from a problem you identified or an experience that has highlighted its importance. Dr. Maina, would you like to go first?
Thank you, Dimple, for that wonderful welcome. And I think for me, sustainability comes in because growing up, I've seen a big change in the environment around me. Growing up partly in the rural area and partly in the city, there's been a lot of changes that occur around. For example, we used to swim in the rivers as small children. The rivers were smelling fresh and they were full of fish. But in later generation, within 10 years, nobody could swim in those rivers and there was no fish to catch. So those drastic changes from the fact that we used to have a lot of mist in the mornings floating among the trees to suddenly no mist at all led me to really start thinking that there's something that we must be doing wrong that is changing the environment so much to the negative.
Thank
So
you.
that is part of the
Meigan,
motivation.
thank you so much for sharing that. Meigan, would you like to answer too?
Yes, thank you very much. And also just emphasizing, thank you so much for inviting me for this talk today. And I think I share some similar perspective to our previous panelists. But first off, this is going to sound very naive, but when I was younger, my objective in life, and it still is in a way, was to create a better world. So this is something that I wanted to do when I was younger. And I started doing a lot of Model United Nations, right? And in Models United Nations, you feel like you can actually generate a better world because you are discussing and you are generating solutions to worldwide problems. And it was in actually one of these discussions that I realized that one of the biggest threats to humanity and to security worldwide was climate change. And that's why I started thinking, okay, so we have this big thread. And then I also saw it in my daily life, just as the previous panelist was explaining, right? I'm also coming from a developing country. Actually, like very close to my house, there was a polluted river. The smell is not good, it's not healthy. So you start figuring out the fact that in order to generate a better world, the environment perspective cannot be left behind, because otherwise you can work with initiatives for social development, for economic development, but if sustainability and the environment isn't there, then they're not really going to work.
Very true.
Yeah, yes, definitely. As a young person myself, I also want to, create a change in the world. And climate change is definitely an issue where I'm sure there's still so much we can do. So let's move on to kind of some of the work that you guys are doing. Megan, I do believe you started your own youth-led initiative in Walla Critique. Would you like to share a little bit about it um, and how you guys have been working to make the future more sustainable?
Of course, thank you so much for the answer. So, involucratic, just to give a background of the meaning of the name in Spanish, the translation would be getting involved plus tech. So, it's involucra, get involved, and then tech. One of the reasons for this name was that we wanted to get people involved in the solution of different problems that were affecting our community. So, that's why it's involucra and then tech, right? Because of, I think that that doesn't need a translation. And also, just for the record, the university and high school where I studied has the name Tech in it. So it was also like a really good catchphrase, like in order to capture what we wanted to do. Now, having explained this basic introduction to the name, it was founded in 2015. And the way in which it has worked throughout the years is by empowering young people to develop solutions in their local communities, mainly with the combination of two factors. First, education on sustainable development, because we believe that young people cannot be empowered to generate sustainable solutions if there's not sufficient knowledge first. And then, after a base of knowledge has been built with the volunteers and young people that participate, then being able to generate sustainable development projects in their communities. One of the biggest projects that we generated, it's actually also related with education, but translating it to some rural areas or different communities that are located in Puebla, Mexico. That's my hometown. And other type of solutions have been linked to creating campaigns in terms of climate change. We have had allies from all over the world in order to participate in these climate change and reduction of waste campaigns. And now the organization is taking a different focus. It is changing from these just like local based solutions, and it's changing to developing research, and then from the research that is developed translated into policy briefs that are delivered to strategic actors. So in a nutshell, that is Involucratec and the way it has evolved throughout the years.
Thank you so much for sharing about Involucratic. Indeed, when I first saw the name, I was really interested in how you came up with that name, and then of course the work that you're doing is pretty amazing. Now, you kind of mentioned sorry, you mentioned how you're focused on educating youth to learn more about climate and how they can solve these issues. And Dr. Maina, I believe you are a lecturer at a university and work towards educating students as well. Can you share a little bit
Hmm.
about your
Hmm.
experience and work in kind of bringing about these issues related to agriculture towards the younger generation?
Yeah, thank you, Dimple. Now, it's always a pleasure to work with the, and we always say for us who have the privilege to work with the youth, we remain young for very long because you get the same age bracket year in, year out. Now, certainly, there's a lot of things we've been doing, some directly involved with your teaching duties. For example, One of the units I enjoy most teaching is what we call environmental sustainability, where you're able to bring up the issues of climate change and other issues that are affecting the students. And what is encouraging here is that you'll find students whose majors have nothing to do with the environment. Probably they're doing international relations, or probably they're doing business majors. Eventually, when you meet them outside, the classes that you stirred that interest in them is what they're making their living out of. They've taken a full turn away from what their major was, and they're earning their living from matters to do with the environment. Now, one of the things I also did at the university is I began a center called Sustainable Development Initiative Centers. And one of the strong points is that we, through my adventure spirit, I would go into the what we call the slum areas, the underprivileged areas, and you'd find hundreds of youth who are looking for some sort of direction. And when you direct them to matters of science, of their environment, they really pick up, and you find a very good conversion rate from people who are going towards criminal tendencies to find that there's actually something useful they can do within their surroundings. Now, the education, such education, what is good about it is that it creates a change in a person. They start looking around and they channel their energy into trying to make a difference into the surrounding environment, but also at the same time, they realize that they can make a living out of it. So these are the encouraging things. So there's a theoretical aspect of it where we emphasize, ensure that the students have a lot of knowledge. And then there's a practical aspect of it, which some students pick up and they get out in the world and they take that knowledge you had equipped them with together with the practical component, and they're able to make a living out of it. So I think for the youth, there's a lot of opportunities in this climate change talk. If you take an interest, if you become proactive, definitely and certainly there is going to be some room for you to be able to not only earn a living, but also, and you will discover this, have that satisfaction, which even the previous panelist has talked about, have that satisfaction of being able to make a change in the world, so to speak.
Definitely. That was very empowering as a young person myself. It's kind of enforced my inspiration to also use STEM to make the future better. Now, you were mentioning how when you're working at like with climate change, you see students from a variety of majors from like public policy, business, as well as STEM. Would you like to explain a little bit more about how public policy can play a big role in climate action?
Yes,
Dr.
thank you, Dimple. One of the biggest things, and one of the biggest things that drives the applications, the reinforcement of what we call environmental protection comes from policies. So very critical to that is that we must have the correct policies in place. And if you have a policy background, it gives you that advantage is that you understand policies, right from the policy making cycle to the policy implementation, policy assessment, monitoring and evaluation to say, was it the correct policy? Now, such a person is then very powerful, is a very powerful member of the stakeholders in regard to trying to protect the environment. You have your scientists who understand, they collect the data, they can show proof that a causative agent in this particular happening is X, but then the policymakers will come in and say, yes, then the policy want to craft around there is A, B, C, D, and this is going to be its life cycle. So to the business majors, there's always money to be made. And money is not bad, especially if it's going to provide you a livelihood. Okay, so you'll see those angles. What are the opportunities that we can come in and get some money coming out of this whole venture? So there is a whole mix. There's even psychologists when we have disasters happening. I think that's a very underestimated field. Where how are people dealing with the trauma? You have rural people who year in year out are dealing with floods, they're dealing with droughts, they're dealing with volcanic eruptions. What is their mental state? And who is going to do that for us if not the psychologists? the social behaviorists. So there's so much room for everybody around that aspect that it's very beautiful. If you are fortunate to have a class of mixed people, then you are crafting a perfect tool to deal with that environmental protection.
That is actually quite an insightful like perspective. I had never thought about like the psychology aspect of natural disasters myself, and I think that's really interesting. And it's definitely a field that in the future has a lot of scope for growth. And I do believe, Megan, you worked with enacting public policies and enacting change within your community. Would you like to share a little bit about your experience doing so?
Of course, also adding a little bit into what has just been said about public policies and the importance, right? So right now I'm pursuing this master's degree in public policy, and I think I agree with everything that was just mentioned because in a way I feel that like it is fragmented, right? Like the way that right now degrees and policy implementation and formulation works is fragmented. So but this cannot continue that way, because if it continues in this direction, then it's not going to lead to sustainable solutions. So the main gap that we need to cover is this gap between science, between politicians. If we see, for example, Greta Thunberg, right, and all the activists, at the end of the day, they have research, they have the scientific knowledge, but they are trying to translate it into actionable policies, right? So in the end, we need to see ways in which this connection can be made better, right? So just wanted to emphasize on that point. And now just answering the question of like the experience in translating science, research, or innovation into actionable policies, I think I can recommend certain points in how to do that, right? Because translating this science and research and innovation into actionable policies, as I just said, can be seen as two different worlds. And bridging this gap is what is relevant in order to lead to the outcomes that we expect. So first of all, and also recalling on what was said about the psychology aspect, it is very important that the research that is done, science and innovations, are understandable, and are understandable in simple terms, because sometimes we as human beings are just terrible at understanding climate change. And the way that we have understood it doesn't actually cause an impact on us. We understand it as something that is affecting the earth, but we need to find a way to communicate the problem, to communicate what has been found, in order for people to realize that it's a threat to their very own existence. This is something that needs to improve. And if the research that young people generate has this component of being understandable and being translated into simple terms that everyone can understand, then it's going to be successful. A second element that I would recommend is also that it is, in a way, implementable. So when somebody is generating research, it is important to consider from the beginning, how is it that it's going to be implementable in a long scale? Or how is it that it can just go from a recommendation to something that could be achieved in a later stage? In a way that I could like recommend doing this is by generating guides, strategies, frameworks. So this has worked a lot, like in the experience that I have in terms of translating what was found into actionable policies. Because, for example, there are some guides about how to recover from COVID-19 that I helped to generate in previous collaborations. And then by creating these guides, these frameworks, these recommendations, like this is exactly what should be done, these are the steps that should be taken, then it's very easy. Then it's very easy to just, take this existing framework and apply it. And just finally, I would just recommend connecting research with feasibility. Because, for example, reducing the use of fossil fuels, it's definitely the goal, right? But it can have devastating economic consequences for developing countries. So it is important to in a way, understand the the complete outlook, right? And see, okay, if, like fossil fuels and using this type of energy that is not clean is maybe the best way for developing economies to produce, then having this on mind, what can be done to change it? What changes can be done in this regard? So I think in a way, these are the main recommendations that I would suggest to translate scientific knowledge into actionable policies.
Yes, thank you so much for sharing your answer. And definitely, when you come into looking at things from a global scale, and we compare how a lot of the anthropogenic activities that are causing this climate crisis is in more of the developed world, while the developing world is sort of taking it's at the expense of the developing world. And that is something that we do need to keep in mind as we move forward with our innovations and our scientific research. With that, I would like Dr. Mina, do you think you could speak a little bit about the research work that you're doing within your university, either with the medicinal plants or with the Natural Product Center, and how is the experience of working towards climate change?
Thank you again, Dimple. Now, the research that we're focusing on, having a botany background, I have a lot of interest in plants and their existence. And I have a slightly different view of people who come from the background of hug a tree, don't cut a tree. I always say that these are resources that we must utilize. The important thing is to ensure the sustainability. If you cut a tree, plant a tree. Now we have a lot of we've lost, unfortunately, in our let me use the word with reservation, modernization. We've lost a lot of knowledge of things that were life-giving to us. Simple things like plants. These are life-giving, and they were put on earth by God, by the Creator for a purpose. And we've lost touch with them as we've lost our environment. So, what part of what I do is to working with the students is to return back the knowledge as simple of the names of trees and names of plants. And over time, if you come to our campus, we had labeled all the trees with a variety of names. And that helps. It's a bit of passive learning. Every time the students pass a tree and they have a little bit of curiosity, they will look at the tree and say, so this tree is called this and that. And privately, a lot of people have come, not just this, but even the staff working in the university, they've told me, I've been looking for this kind of tree, but I was so happy to see its name. Now I've planted it in my home garden or in my rural area. So we are trying to, by showing the importance, generating, part of it is for knowledge, showing the importance of even some of the plants which look like weeds in a bush area do have a medicinal consequence in our lives. So that brings up the importance of the plant and also creates opportunities for the students because we have working in a pharmacy school, we have the chemistry, the equipment to do extractions, to do identifications. So these are the things that you take the students through, and they leave knowing that in as much as I'm a pharmacist and I'm going to be prescribing drugs, which we have imported, but there's also potential to preserve our environment and start exploiting some of the plants that we have about. So the Natural Products Center aims to retain that knowledge because there's going to be a lot of
I believe the screen
who
is.
have retained that knowledge over time, and we hope that that information is going to come in and it's going to be shared. And then also the component of production, because currently as we stand, we are a very big importer of pharmaceutical drugs, and we have them around ourselves. So ultimately, the aim is to create researchers who have the boldness and have the knowledge and confidence to say that from our own resources, we can be able to look at what is available to cure even COVID and any other disease that is going to, pandemic that is going to come up. That's the kind of thing that we have lost, sadly enough. But through our research, through our training, we hope that we can start bringing it back to the communities.
Definitely, that was really insightful. I myself do have like a personal link with things like Ayurveda, which is like Indian traditional medicine with
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
plant based health, like medicine studies. And so I really found this unique because this shows how around the world there is so much like traditional plant-based research that could connect with our current modern technology and modern medicine methods to create like a more sustainable future. Because at the end of the day, we want to create a system using both our modern technology and like kind of looking into our history and our traditional values to make the world better. So I really like that. Thank you so much for sharing. And I think there was a question in the chat earlier that was kind of buried by other messages. It was a question for Megan asking, how should we get involved in policy writing?
Thank you for the question. I think, well, a way to get involved. First, I can give you maybe some tips because then I think the way to get involved in policy writing could be like through developing research, developing these ideas, these perspectives that you would like to recommend, and then actually transforming them into this type of writing that is very peculiar for public policy. So the tips that I would give in case you have already developed some valuable research, in case you have found some valuable solutions, and now you're just trying to connect, the research with how do I translate this to my local representatives or to the government, then I would suggest for you to get familiar with the writing of policy briefs. You can just write it. You can find more information about that. But what are the main characteristics about a policy brief and writing for suggesting policies? Then it's very important that you are concise, and that is, I think, one of the main differences sometimes with research. Like research work, because sometimes research can be very extensive, a lot, thousands of words can be included. But in the end of the day, a policy brief or policy recommendations are sometimes no longer than 5 or 7 pages. So they have to be very concise. Think about it in a way like if it is the abstract of your research. In an abstract, you should be able to translate what is the problem and what are the solutions, and a little from the background and of course the methodology. But the most important thing is which are the solutions that you're recommending and why would they work. So that's what I would recommend in your writing, the way to write this type of public policy recommendations or policy briefs. And then the way to get involved, make sure that you have something valuable to share.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And another question that did kind of come up is regarding agribusiness. Agribusiness was mentioned earlier by Dr. Maina. Would you like to share a little bit about how youth can get involved in agribusiness?
Yes, that's another passion that I have, and that came from my because my background also is crop physiology. A lot of my research was in crops. Now, one of the things that we find is disappearing because of pursuit of other careers is the production of food. Now, we with agribusiness, you're looking to get involved in food in many ways. It can be you can be the producer, you can be a supplier at the end of it, you can be a marketer, or you can be a value adder. You just do value addition. But basically, where the youth are concerned, we normally create programs of training where we go around the East African region and particularly Kenya, advertise and interview to try to get as many youth as possible, especially with a gender bias. Sometimes we do 60% women, 40% men, or vice versa, keep on mixing it up. But then we try to equip them with skills, find out what are you doing? Do you have anything around you that can assist for you to, as much as you don't have a job, that can, or you have one that can assist to bring extra income to your family. And we take that and we train around various aspects of excellence, which the youth can get involved in and improve their production. There's initiate production and then factors that can help them to improve it and enter the market. And we've had some very good successes. One of our biggest success stories was a young person who took up, he realized that there was a love for chicken around his area, and he began dial a chicken. The chicken word in Kiswahili is kuku, dial a kuku. So people would call up and he would deliver the chicken to them. So you see, he got involved in agribusiness, but at the supply place of it. So it is a program that we look particularly for people coming in the developing world. There's a lot of opportunities still. As urbanization increases, people need to be fed. So for you as a young person, what are the kind of opportunities that we can look at that you can get involved in so that you can be not the old fashioned, not the old traditional farmer, but a young person who's involved in the food industry, but in a way that allows you to use skills that you have obtained in some agribusiness training. Yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And as we are running a little bit short on time, what are some last final words you want to share with your audience regarding how we can bring together public policy, things like business, everything together along with them to really move forward into a more sustainable future? Megan, would you like to take
Okay.
this? Or,
Sorry.
sorry, Dr. You may go ahead.
Okay, okay. I was going to say Megan to go first, but it's okay. For the youth, the policies that are coming up are aiming at, for example, the year 2050. The people who are going to be active in the year 2050 is the youth right now who are listening in. So it's important that you take an interest in the current policies. What is being suggested? What is working? What is not working? What are the challenges? Because the future that these policies are targeting is your future. So you'll be doing yourself a disservice if you do nothing, hear nothing, see nothing at this current time, only to find that we, the adults of this time, was setting your future without you being involved. So I like that question of how can we get into policy writing. Definitely, that's a very practical aspect of it. Get involved in it. Start seeing what is working, what is not working, because the future is yours. Okay, and so take an interest. The various government sectors, the various agencies which are grappling with various things. This is your future as the youth right now. So it's important that you take an interest in it so that you can have a part ownership of whatever it is that we're planning for you in the future.
Thank you
Sorry,
so
I
much.
don't know. Should I go next?
Yes, please. Just like the final imparting words you'd like to end off with.
Okay, so I would just like to leave some three final recommendations that I think are very important to share with youth and regarding innovation, research, science, and translating it into actionable policies. So my first recommendation is think about the feasibility and the implementation from the proposal stage. Whatever is it, the research or idea or innovative solution that you have, think about how feasible and implementable would it be since the moment you're generating it. And that will save you from a lot of constraints that could appear much later during the research stage. Second, please consider the social and economic perspective to your solutions. The way we see sustainable development nowadays is this way, right? It's the connection between the three dimensions, the economic, the social, and the environmental. So I'm emphasizing on this also because it is essential to consider the specific context of developing countries. So the solutions that are proposed to developed countries and developing countries, sometimes they cannot work in both scenarios, right? So it is very important to consider this particular context, this particular social and economic context. And just to give you a very fast and concrete example, consider like the perspectives from indigenous groups, native communities, and also cheaper ways to develop sustainable energy in developing countries. because there's actually they use, as I said before, of fossil fuels. They are used because they are the cheapest way to do, right? And if we want to introduce new technologies, then what is the trade-off? We need to identify solutions that aren't as expensive and that countries can actually implement. And finally, my last recommendation is be innovative. And what do I mean by innovative? Think about ways of connecting the both worlds. Think about ways to connect public policy with science and innovation and research. Only this way we will lead to a sustainable future.
Thank you so much, Megan, for those actionable ending closing points. And Dr. Mina and Megan, we had an amazing discussion today, and we're also grateful that you guys were able to join us today. And we will be moving our break to after our next session.